I'm standing at the edge of a frozen world, my breath fogging up the icy glass of the cabin window, watching the Colorado mountains stretch endlessly into a pale, wintry sky. My name's Hannah, 32 years old, and I've come here with Mark, my husband of 6 years, chasing something we've lost along the way. We've been unraveling for months, threads of arguments and silences pulling us apart, and this remote cabin, tucked away from everything we know, was supposed to be our last-ditch effort to stitch ourselves back together. I can see the snow-covered peaks piercing the horizon, their jagged edges softened by a fresh dusting of white, and I can hear the faint crackle of the fireplace behind me, a small rebellion against the cold seeping through the walls. In my hands, a mug of hot cocoa weighs heavy, its warmth a fleeting comfort against the chill that settled somewhere deeper, somewhere inside me. It's a void I can't name, a hollow ache that this beautiful, serene place can't fill, no matter how hard I try to let it. This morning, I woke to the sound of wind howling outside, a mournful cry that seemed to echo the tension between us. I pulled a thick blanket around my shoulders, the wool scratching against my skin, and watched Mark unpack our bags. His smile was forced, a thin mask over whatever he's really feeling, and I couldn't bring myself to say anything to break the quiet. It reminded me of the drive up here, those winding mountain roads twisting through the storm, the snow piling on the windshield like it was trying to bury us. Inside the car, the silence between us was heavier than the blizzard outside, each mile stretching the distance between who we were and who we've become. I kept my eyes on the road, gripping the steering wheel a little too tight, while Mark stared out the window, lost in thoughts he wouldn't share. Sitting by the fire now, sipping this cocoa without tasting it, I can't help but drift back to a memory of us from years ago. We were at a little diner near our first apartment, laughing over a shared milkshake, our hands brushing as we reached for the same straw. His eyes crinkled at the corners back then, full of light, and my laughter came so easily. Now as we sit here, the fire casting shadows on the cabin walls, we don't speak. The mugs in our hands are barriers, excuses not to look at each other. The warmth of the drink does nothing for the coldness that's grown between us, and I wonder if we've forgotten how to reach across it. Before we got here, I had a brief call with Olivia, the cabin's owner. Her voice came through the phone warm and reassuring, a stark contrast to the static of my own nerves. She gave us directions, her tone almost maternal as she described the hidden turnoff we'd need to find, and promised to stop by during our week-long stay if we needed anything. I remember clinging to the sound of her voice like it was a lifeline. A small reminder of kindness in a world that felt increasingly distant, but now, as the first full day in this cabin unfolds, I'm left to face the reality of why we're here. And it's heavier than I expected. The morning started with a plan to go on a hike, an attempt to shake off the weight of last night's silence. I bundled up in layers of fleece and a puffy jacket, the cold already biting at my fingertips. As I laced up my boots, Mark was ready before me, standing by the door with his scarf wrapped tight, his breath visible in the frigid air. We stepped out into the snowy trails, the crunch of our footsteps the only sound between us. The mountains loomed around us, silent giants draped in white, and I couldn't help but feel small under their gaze. We barely spoke, each of us locked in our own thoughts, though every now and then, one of us would point out something, a frozen stream glittering like glass under the weak sunlight, or the distant silhouette of an elk moving through the trees. I wanted to say more, to fill the quiet with something meaningful, but the words wouldn't come. At one point, I slipped on an icy patch, my boots skidding out from under me. Mark's hand shot out, steadying me for a brief moment, his grip firm but fleeting. "Careful," he muttered, pulling away almost as quickly as he'd reached for me, and I felt the absence of his touch more than the cold. Back at the cabin, we decided to cook a simple meal together, as if the act of preparing food could somehow mend what's broken. The kitchen was small, barely enough room for both of us, and we kept bumping into each other awkwardly. My elbow brushing his arm as I reached for a pot, his shoulder nudging mine as he grabbed a spoon. I chopped vegetables on the tiny counter, the rhythmic thud of the knife against the cutting board louder than any conversation we managed to muster. Mark stirred a pot of soup on the stove, the smell of onions and broth filling the air, but then a faint burning scent crept in. He cursed under his breath, realizing he'd let it scorch, but then he laughed. A short, forced sound that didn't reach his eyes. "Guess I'm not winning any chef awards," he said, and I tried to smile, but it felt like a lie. We ate in near silence, the clink of spoons against bowls the only thing breaking the stillness, and I couldn't help but notice how tired his eyes looked, how they avoided meeting mine. Later, we sat by the fire with a dusty old board game we'd found on a shelf, Monopoly of all things. As if rolling dice and buying fake property could bring us closer, I won, landing on boardwalk and building hotels while Mark's pieces lagged behind. But there was no joy in it. I glanced at him, hoping for a spark of the playful competitiveness we used to have, but the spark never came. The day dragged on, heavy with unspoken words, until evening settled over the cabin like a thick, dark blanket. I was staring out the window again, watching the last light fade from the sky, when a sharp knock at the door jolted me from my thoughts. My heart skipped, a strange mix of anticipation and nerves as I crossed the creaky wooden floor to answer it. There she was, Olivia, the cabin's owner, standing in the doorway with snowflakes melting on her jacket, her smile easy and genuine as she greeted us. Her heavy winter boots left little clumps of snow on the mat as she stepped inside, her confident stride filling the small space with a kind of energy I hadn't felt all day. Her wool hat sat slightly askew, strands of messy, dark hair peeking out, catching the dim light of the cabin. I caught a faint whiff of wood smoke clinging to her jacket, earthy and grounding, and for reasons I couldn't name, I couldn't take my eyes off her. She was magnetic in a way that made my chest tighten, so different from the numbness that had settled between Mark and me. "Hey, just wanted to check on that heating system like I promised," she said, her voice warm and familiar, like we'd known each other for years instead of just a phone call. Mark, slouched on the couch with a book he wasn't really reading, looked up and gave a polite nod. He mumbled a tired, "Hey, thanks," before yawning through a few words about the day's hike. I could see the exhaustion in his shoulders, the way his eyes drooped, and after a quick, perfunctory chat with Olivia, he stood, kissed my forehead, a gesture more habit than feeling, and muttered something about turning in early. "Long day," he said, his voice flat, before shuffling toward the bedroom. The door clicked shut behind him, a small, final sound that left me alone with Olivia in the quiet of the cabin. She moved toward the thermostat near the hallway, her fingers deftly adjusting dials and tapping buttons, while I hovered nearby, pretending to be interested in the mechanics of it all. We made small talk about the cabin's quirks, the way the snow had piled up outside, the forecast for more flurries overnight. But I hung on every word she said, every glance she threw my way, her hazel eyes catching the flicker of the fireplace. There was something in the way she looked at me, a quiet intensity that made my skin prickle, and I found myself talking more than I had all day, my voice softer, almost searching, when she finished with the thermostat, declaring it good as new. We drifted toward the fireplace, settling on the worn rug in front of it. The heat from the flames warmed my face, but it was her presence beside me that sent a different kind of warmth through my veins. The conversation shifted as we sat there, the crackle of the fire filling the pauses. She started talking about her life up here in the mountains, her voice low and intimate, like she was letting me into a hidden part of herself. She told me how she'd moved to this remote place after a painful breakup, craving solitude to heal, to figure out who she was without someone else defining her. It's lonely sometimes, she admitted, staring into the flames. But there's a kind of freedom in it, too. You learn to live with the quiet. Her words hit me hard, stirring up my own ache, the one I'd been trying to ignore. I found myself opening up in a way I hadn't with anyone in months, not even Mark. I told her about the distance between us, how I felt like I was drifting through my own life, lost in a fog I couldn't clear. She listened, really listened, her gaze steady and unguarded, and it felt like she saw me, truly saw me, for the first time in forever. The air between us grew heavier, charged with something I couldn't name but couldn't ignore. The fire popped and hissed, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and I felt the cold seeping through the window behind us, a sharp contrast to the heat building in my chest. Now, as I sit here alone by the dying fire, the embers glowing faintly in the hearth, I'm left with the echo of what just happened. Olivia's gone, her footsteps long faded into the snowy night, but the memory of her lingers like a ghost. My hands tremble as I clutch the throw blanket tighter around me, the rough fabric grounding me against the storm of emotions swirling inside. I keep replaying that moment, her hand brushing mine as she stood to leave, the way her touch sent a jolt through me, electric and forbidden. There's shame in the memory, a bitter taste that coats my tongue. But there's something else too, something exhilarating, a rush I haven't felt in years. It's like waking up after a long, numb sleep, and I hate myself for wanting more of it. I lift my sleeve to my face, inhaling deeply, and there it is. Her scent, faint but unmistakable, a mix of wood smoke and something softer, like pine or lavender, clinging to the wool of my sweater. It's a cruel reminder of how close we were, sitting there on the rug, our knees almost touching as the firelight played across her face. My skin still holds the warmth of that closeness, a phantom heat that contrasts sharply with the cold emptiness of the cabin now. The silence is oppressive, broken only by the occasional pop of the dying fire, and it feels like the walls are closing in, trapping me with my own thoughts. I glance around, half expecting to see some trace of her still here, but there's nothing. Just the empty mug she drank from, sitting on the coffee table, a silent witness to the line I've crossed. My gaze drifts down the hall toward the bedroom where Mark sleeps, oblivious to the war raging in my head. I picture him there, curled under the heavy quilt, his breathing slow and steady, trusting in a version of me that doesn't exist anymore. Guilt claws at my chest, sharp and relentless, as I think about the vows I made, the life we've built, fragile as it is. How could I do this to him? How could I let myself feel something so raw, so undeniable, for someone else? I press my palms against my eyes, trying to push the thoughts away, but they keep coming, relentless. I've betrayed him, even if it was just a moment, just a touch, just a look that lingered too long. And the worst part is, I don't know if I regret it. Not fully, not yet. I stand, my legs shaky, and shuffle over to the window, the cold glass pressing against my forehead as I stare out into the night. Snow falls in slow, heavy flakes, blanketing the world in a hush that feels almost mocking. Somewhere out there, Olivia's driving down the mountain, her taillights long swallowed by the dark. I wonder if she's thinking about me, if she felt the same pull I did, or if I'm just a fleeting distraction in her solitary life. The uncertainty gnaws at me, a hollow ache that mixes with the fear of never seeing her again. I don't even know what I'd say if I did, but the thought of her disappearing from my life entirely feels like losing something vital, something I didn't even know I needed until tonight. Turning away from the window, my eyes catch on a framed photo on the mantel. Mark and me, years ago, grinning on a beach somewhere, the sun setting behind us in a blaze of orange and pink. We look so happy, so sure of each other, and the sight of it stabs at me, fresh and raw. Tears prick at the corners of my eyes, hot and unbidden, and I whisper a quiet, "I'm sorry," into the empty room, my voice barely a breath. I don't know if I'm apologizing to him or to myself, to the person I thought I was before tonight shattered that illusion. I've spent so long suppressing this part of me, burying it under layers of routine and expectation, that I didn't even recognize it until Olivia's presence dragged it into the light. This attraction, this pull, it's not just a fleeting impulse, a momentary lapse, it's a deeper truth. The night passed in a haze, my mind a tangled mess of thoughts and emotions that kept sleep just out of reach. I lay in the dark, listening to the faint creak of the cabin settling under the weight of the snow, my heart pounding with the weight of what I'd felt, what I'd realized. By the time the first hints of dawn crept through the window, I was already awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling like a stranger in my own skin. The soft gray light filtered into the room, casting long shadows across the wooden floor, and I heard Mark stirring in the kitchen before I even dragged myself out of bed. His footsteps were light, almost cheerful, a stark contrast to the heaviness that clung to me like a second skin. I pulled on a sweater, the wool rough against my arms, and forced myself to face the day, though every step felt like wading through quicksand. When I shuffled into the kitchen, Mark was already there, humming an old tune under his breath, a song we used to sing together on road trips, back when everything felt simpler. He was fiddling with the coffee maker, the rich, bitter aroma filling the small space as steam curled up from the pot. His flannel shirt was rumpled, his hair still messy from sleep, but there was a lightness to him I hadn't seen in weeks. He turned to me with a small, genuine smile, the kind that used to make my heart skip, and said, "Morning, Han. Thought we'd watch the sunrise from the porch. It's supposed to be something special up here." I nodded, my throat tight, and managed to curve my lips into something resembling a smile, though it felt like a betrayal of the storm raging inside me. He didn't notice, or maybe he didn't want to, as he poured 2 mugs of coffee, handing one to me with a casual ease that only deepened the ache in my chest. We bundled up in our heavy coats, scarves wrapped tight against the biting cold, and stepped out onto the cabin's porch. The air was sharp, stinging my cheeks as I clutched the warm mug between my gloved hands. The world was still, wrapped in the hush of early morning, the snow stretching out before us like a pristine canvas, untouched by the chaos of my thoughts. Mark stood beside me, his shoulder brushing mine, and we watched as the first rays of sunlight crept over the snowy peaks in the distance. The light spilled across the mountains, turning the white expanse into a sea of shimmering gold, each ridge and valley catching the glow in a way that stole my breath. It was beautiful, achingly so, a perfect backdrop to the turmoil twisting inside me. I felt Mark's hand find mine, his fingers squeezing gently through the layers of fabric, a quiet gesture of connection that should have comforted me, but instead felt like a weight I couldn't bear. We stood there in silence, the only sound the faint whistle of the wind through the pines, and I tried to lose myself in the view, to let the beauty of it all drown out the noise in my head. But then Mark shifted closer, pulling me into a hug, his arms wrapping around me with a warmth that was so familiar, so safe. His breath was warm against my ear as he murmured, "I think this trip is working, Han. I feel closer to you already." His words sliced through me, sharp and cold, each syllable a reminder of the secret I carried, the truth I hadn't dared to voice. Guilt surged, hot and suffocating, mingling with the icy air in my lungs, and I felt my chest tighten as I stood there, locked in his embrace. Unable to respond, I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that this closeness he felt was an illusion, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I stayed silent, my mind racing as the golden light washed over us, illuminating everything I'd been hiding from. In that moment, with the sunrise painting the world in hues of amber and rose, A stark clarity hit me like a wave crashing against the shore. I didn't want this life with Mark. Not because I didn't love him, because I did, in a way that had shaped so much of who I was. But because I knew I wasn't being honest with myself, or with him, about who I truly am. That realization has lingered with me through the last hours of our stay here. A quiet undercurrent to every mundane task as we prepare to leave this cabin behind. Now, as the final morning dawns over the mountains, I'm folding clothes into our suitcase, my hands moving mechanically, smoothing out wrinkles in shirts and sweaters that carry the faint scent of pine and smoke from our time here. The bedroom is quiet, save for the soft rustle of fabric and the distant sound of Mark zipping up his own bag in the next room. We don't speak, each of us wrapped in our own thoughts, though I know our silences hold very different weights. My mind keeps drifting back to that moment by the fire, to the way Olivia's presence cracked open something inside me I'd long ignored. As I tuck a pair of jeans into the suitcase, my fingers brush against the edge of a drawer, and there it is. A small folded piece of paper, a note from Olivia. I hadn't noticed before. It must have been left when she stopped by, maybe a quick jot of instructions or a contact number for the cabin. My heart stumbles as I unfold it, seeing her hurried handwriting. And though it's nothing more than a reminder to lock up properly, I slip it into my pocket like a secret keepsake, a tangible piece of the storm she stirred in me. I zip up the suitcase with a final, decisive tug, the sound cutting through the stillness, and haul it toward the door. Mark is already outside, loading a few smaller bags into the car, his breath visible in the crisp morning air. I step into the living room one last time, my gaze lingering on the empty fireplace, now just a cold, ashen memory of the heat that once filled this space. The hearth is dark, the logs reduced to gray dust, and it feels like a mirror to something inside me. Something burned out, but still smoldering beneath the surface. I pull my coat tighter around me and head out, the cold biting at my skin as I drag the suitcase down the porch steps. The snow underfoot crunches with each step, a sharp, brittle sound that echoes in the quiet. I notice how it started to melt in patches, revealing slushy, muddy earth beneath, as if the world itself is shedding a layer, ready to move on. I load the bag into the trunk, the metal of the car icy against my ungloved hands, and steal a glance back at the cabin. It stands there, sturdy and silent, its weathered wood and frosted windows holding secrets I can't quite decipher. I linger on that image, as if staring long enough might reveal answers to questions I'm not ready to ask out loud. Mark slams the trunk shut, the noise jolting me back to the present, and I turn to see him rubbing his hands together for warmth, a faint smile on his face. He doesn't seem to notice the weight I'm carrying, or maybe he's choosing to ignore it, just as I've chosen to keep my turmoil hidden. We climb into the car, the seats stiff and chilled, and I pull the door closed with a heavy thud. As he starts the engine, the hum of it fills the space between us, a mechanical distraction from the silence we've grown so used to. He begins to talk, his voice light and forward-looking, tossing out ideas about next year's trip. Maybe somewhere warmer, he says with a chuckle, like a beach house or a desert getaway. I nod absently, murmuring a vague, "Sounds good," while my eyes are drawn to the window, to the passing peaks that tower over us as we start our descent down the mountain. The jagged ridges are dusted with fresh snow, their edges softened by the morning mist, and they seem to watch us leave, indifferent to the chaos they've witnessed in my heart. I press my forehead against the cool glass, feeling the vibration of the road beneath us, and let my thoughts wander to a future I can't predict, one where I'll have to face hard conversations and painful choices I haven't told Mark about Olivia, about the way her presence shifted something fundamental inside me. But as the city lights blur past, I realize that it's time to confront the truth and find the courage to share my heart with him. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment if you enjoyed this story. This will help us create more engaging stories for you.